We're starting, well, I guess we're kind of right on time. I came in hot. There was some traffic, so I'm glad that I was able to get here. I've not had a chance to look across the screen, but we won't take the time to do that now. We'll go ahead and get started, and then we're going to conduct some board training this morning. Those are the items that will be first on our agenda. So during that training, I'll go through and look at the screen and do a roll call and make sure that we have a quorum, so that we can conduct some action items after the training. But once again, welcome. We appreciate you being here on this cold December morning. We hope that you all are doing well, that you had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday, and looking forward to holiday season later this month. So we have two trainings to conduct this morning. First, we have board diversity training, and then following that, we have open meeting training. So I am going to turn to Spencer here and see if is our guest here for our
doesn't appear she's
training.
on yet.
She's not.
She is not. So I think what we'll do is we'll go to the open meeting training first, and that is a video. So this is a requirement. It's state policy that as a board we hold this training. So we'll go ahead and watch that video now.
And Kurt's thankfully from Canab. He's going to run it because he's got the screen up.
Great.
So when I start this, if you guys can't hear it or something, just let me know.
Okay. And do you mind making it full screen so we?
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Kurt.
Thanks.
So what is the Open Public Meetings Act? It's the state law that ensures government actions and deliberations are openly conducted. Before we continue, keep in mind that this video is an overview and exceptions may exist based on your entity type. We focus on local government, not state requirements. When in doubt, read the law and consult with your legal counsel. So what's considered an open and public meeting? It's when a public body quorum, also known as a simple majority, meets to discuss or act upon government business. It includes the meetings sometimes referred to as workshops or executive sessions. Regular meetings, public hearings, electronic meetings, and emergency meetings are all open and public meetings. Open and public meetings don't include chance or social meetings. A public hearing is a type of open and public meeting where citizens have a reasonable opportunity to speak. Public hearings happen when a government adopts a budget, imposes or increases taxes or fees, or transfers money from an enterprise fund. These meetings have extra notice and posting requirements and won't be addressed in this video. An electronic meeting is a type of open and public meeting that's convened electronically, such as via phone or the internet. Remember, the governing body must adopt a resolution, rule, or ordinance allowing and governing electronic meetings. HOTMA adds additional requirements too. An emergency meeting may be held to discuss an urgent matter due to unforeseen circumstances. In order to hold the meeting, the best notice that's feasible is provided of the time, location, and topics to be considered. An attempt is made to contact all governing body members, and the governing body majority approves the meeting. An open and public meeting may be closed to discuss any of the following: a person's character, competence, or health, collective bargaining, litigation, certain real property transactions, including any form of a water right or water shares with specific restrictions, security personnel, devices, or systems deployment, investigations of criminal misconduct, and private or protected information for the Utah Procurement Code, including trade secrets. A closed meeting may be held only if a quorum is present and the meeting was properly noticed. 2/3 of the governing body present at the meeting need to vote yes to close a meeting. Quick math lesson. 2 divided by 3 equals 66.7%. Let's say your governing body has 5 members present at the meeting. If 3 out of 5 members vote yes, that equals 60%, which is not equal or greater than 66.7%, which means you're 1 member short and would need 4 out of 5 members to vote yes. During a closed meeting, a governing body can't interview someone applying to fill an elected position, discuss filling a midterm vacancy or temporary absence, discuss the character, competence, or health of a person whose name was submitted for consideration to fill a midterm vacancy or temporary absence, approve any ordinance, resolution, rule, regulation, contract, or appointment, or take a vote, unless it's a vote on a motion to end the closed portion of the meeting and return to an open meeting. When a governing body closes a meeting, the following must be publicly announced and entered into the minutes of the open meeting at which the closed meeting was approved. The reason or reasons for holding the closed meeting, the location where the closed meeting will be held, and the vote of each member of the governing body either for or against the motion to close the meeting. If a closed meeting is discussing a person's character, competence, or health, or security personnel, devices, or systems deployment, or several other exceptions, mostly related to state bodies or project entities, no recording or minutes are required. However, the presiding member needs to sign a sworn written statement stating such. If the closed meeting is held for any other reason, a recording must be made, which includes date, time, and place of the meeting, names of members present and absent, and names of all others, except where disclosure would infringe on the confidentiality necessary to fulfill the original purpose of closing the meeting. Regular open and public meetings require 24 hours notice. The public notice includes the meeting, agenda, date, time, and place. Public meeting agendas need to include reasonably specified topics to be considered, with each topic listed under a separate agenda item on the meeting agenda. The governing body may not consider a topic in an open meeting that wasn't on the agenda. If a new topic not on the agenda is raised by the public during an open meeting, the governing body may discuss the topic. However, final action may not be taken on the new topic during that meeting. Additionally, entities holding regular meetings scheduled in advance over the course of the year need to provide annual notice of the entire year's meeting schedule. The notice must include date, time, and place for each meeting. Notice is posted at the entity's principal office, or if the entity doesn't have a main office, at the building where the meeting will be held, and the Utah Public Notice website. Typically, posting on the public notice website is done by the records officer, recorder, or clerk. However, it's the governing body's responsibility to ensure notice is provided. State Archives has prepared a training manual and quick guide for owners and posters, as well as training videos that can be accessed at their website, archives.utah.gov. Written minutes and a recording are kept of all open meetings, with few exceptions. Written minutes include the date, time, and place of the meeting, the names of members present and absent, the substance of all matters, names of citizens providing comments, the substance of the comments provided, any information a body member requests be entered into the minutes or recording, and a record by individual member of each vote. A body with elected members must record each vote in list format by category for each action taken by a member, including yes votes, no votes, and absent members next to each member's name. A recording must be a complete and unedited record of all open portions of the meeting from beginning to end, and be labeled with the meeting date, time, and place. All or any part of an open meeting may be independently recorded by any person in attendance if the recording does not interfere with the conduct of the meeting. Pending minutes means written minutes of an open meeting in draft form subject to change before being approved by the public body that held the open meeting. Pending minutes must contain a clear indication, such as a draft or pending watermark, that the governing body hasn't yet approved the minutes and that the minutes are subject to change until the public body approves them. Approved minutes means written minutes of an open meeting approved by the public body that held the open meeting. Entities must establish and implement procedures for the public body's approval of written minutes. Public meeting pending minutes, approved minutes, and recordings are public records under GRAMA. Any individual who publicly presents information relating to an item of the public body's meeting agenda must provide a copy of the information for inclusion in the public record. Make pending minutes available to the public within 30 days. Within 3 business days after approving written minutes of an open meeting, make approved minutes and any public materials available at the Utah Public Notice website, the entity's primary office, and the entity's website. Within 3 business days after holding an open meeting, make an audio recording of the open meeting available to the public for listening.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the open meeting training. I'm just going to check and see with our team here. Do we have
Looks like Nubia's on.
Nubia? Oh, okay, she is there. Great. We're going to now do our board diversity training. I would like to introduce Nubia Pena, who is Senior Advisor, Equity and Opportunity Office of Governor Spencer Cox, and as well as Director of the Utah Division of Multicultural Affairs. There's a complete bio that I encourage you to read in our agenda notes. But Nubia, we so appreciate you taking the time this morning to join our UETN board and conduct this training. We welcome you, and we'll turn the time over to you now for this training.
Excellent. Thank you so very much, sir. And good morning, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be with you. I do apologize. I had some technical difficulties. And while we maybe have, we've been doing this now for about 2-3 years, some things just still happen. So I do just want to say hello to the many people who have joined us virtually, as well as those that are in the audience with us in person in that room. So glad that we'll be able to unpack a couple of concepts and just talk a little bit about the work that's being done at the governor's office in terms of expanding opportunity for Utahns and really trying to understand, right, how as a community of leaders, we're able to grow pathways of leadership, inclusion, and really what the responsibility is for those who are in positions of authority to be able to tap people in and engage them with compassion and allowing for our workplaces to be those where we can thrive. So just as a very brief introduction, I am as the director of the Utah Division of Multicultural Affairs. The work of our division, we have a mission to create an inclusive climate in the state of Utah. And that looks like a lot of different things, right? We engage with our youth. We ensure that we're working with businesses. We are connecting with our legislative partners. We're connecting with frontline stakeholders. And we have been incredibly fortunate to partner with UEN over the last 2 years in programming opportunities that we've had to develop people's understanding around what equity, inclusion, diversity, access is, and how it can be embedded within the organizational priorities of each partner's mission statement, as well as the priorities that they're setting out. So with your permission, I'd like to share my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and just go through a couple of slides with us this morning. And please let me know if you can see this.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Okay, excellent. So this morning, I want to talk about the way that we have been doing this work at the governor's office, specifically around Leading for One Utah. Several of you may have been aware or are aware of the One Utah Roadmap. And when the governor first came into office with Lieutenant Governor Henderson, they outlined their priorities regarding what they wanted as an administration for the first 500 days to accomplish. And there were several initiatives there that tackled addressing representation, creating inclusivity on boards, making sure that we were representing our constituents in the leadership appointments that we had, not only within the governor's office, but on our boards and commissions. And I'm sorry, can you still see the screen? I said that my screen is paused.
I'm sorry, Nubia, it's just showing loading and it's blank.
Okay, let me just tell me now. It says that it was sharing, so we will try again.
Oh, it was on for a brief second. We could see your slides, but now it says loading again.
Excellent. Okay, thank you so much. So it seems like you can only see in the presenter mode. So I'll just go ahead and keep that. We'll do that.
Okay, sorry about that.
Not a problem. Thank you. Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Yes, thanks.
Of course. Thank you so much. All right. So for Leading with One Utah through through principles of inclusive leadership, What we're wanting to do as we're engaging with our various partners across the state is bring awareness to how, as an administration, we're prioritizing these principles that are oftentimes deeply politicized. But what we're asking for people to do is to quiet the noise, to come back to center, and just to ask the question of, what is our mission? What is our purpose? And how can we lead out in our efforts in a way that is considering the people that maybe haven't been at the table, haven't been included, haven't been considered as we have developed our priorities? And this is not about taking away from one community and giving to another. This is simply about growing the table and being more mindful, thoughtful, and intentional in the way that we're setting the tone and priorities for the work that we do. And so with the work that we're trying to advance around equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, what we've seen across the state is that there's several individuals engaged in the work. And what we've also noticed is that there's some initiatives that can actually create harm because it's creating division. And that's not what we're hoping to do. What we want to really do is make sure that this is about collaboration and deep partnership. So our intent is to inspire individuals around EDIA, empower them to understand that this is everyone's work, that this is not about exclusion, but in fact, really making sure that all Utahns in our state can thrive. And we are doing so by equipping people with understanding the principles of leadership that can get us to those outcomes that we're seeking. So inspiring, empowering, and equipping individuals is what we're seeking to do. And so as part of our time together, what I'd like to do is demystify some of these terms that several individuals have thrown around in a lot of ways, right? We've heard them: diversity, equity, inclusion, access, but there's now a new term that has been introduced in the movement, which is called belonging. And again, this is now a new buzzword, but we're wanting to make sure that people learn that this is integral to creating thriving workspaces, that individuals have an opportunity to lead in the type of way where we're thinking not only about our constituents that we serve, but also the most important asset, which is our employees. So what is the internal and external engagement opportunities that we have to create robust experiences for all of the individuals that we encounter? So diversity, folks may think, is just about race, but it's so much more complex because every single person on this panel in this room right now is diverse, right? Whether it's your faith, your gender, your orientation, whether it's your age, your the community and background that you came from, whether you lived on the east side, the west side, if you are a native to Utah, or if you by chance came here from a different state. All of those lived experiences add to the diversity. But I want to tell you all a little bit about these words in a different approach to help you unpack this in a way that feels tangible and when you're doing your work. So diversity, I want you to just for a moment imagine that you are planning an event and you really want to make sure that belonging is achieved by the end of this event. Every single person that comes and visits and encounters your organization and has this experience has a deep sense of belonging. They know that you thought of them, you included them, you considered them, and they felt seen, valued, and respected. So what you've decided to do is you've decided to hire 4 consultants: diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. And all of these individuals are going to ask very different things as they help you plan for this experience. Diversity is going to approach you and ask you, well, who's on your guest list? Who have you invited? Oh, excellent. We have women, we have men, we have people of color, we have individuals from rural Utah. But equity is going to ask a different question. How did we encourage them to engage with attending? Did we make it easier for them to be able to attend this event? Did we provide transportation? Did we create the experience in a location where it was accessible for individuals to engage with us? So equity is asking a very different question from diversity. While diversity is checking the box of who's there, equity is asking, how were people able to get there? How were people able to engage with us? And did we close the gap so that it was easier for that opportunity to happen? Inclusion might ask you, okay, well, what about the meal, the menu? Were people able to contribute their ideas and their thoughts? How about the setting of the tables? Does everybody have somewhere where they're going to be seated next to folks that they know? Well, Access is going to ask something else. It's going to ask, did we consider the way that the table was set? Did we think about a ramp for people who might need a wheelchair access? And so instead of them having a different eyesight, they can sit at the same level with everyone and engage. So as you can see, each of these topics, areas of the work of the movement asks a very different question that creates intentionality and a deliberate moment where we as leaders can pause to think about, who have we not considered? Who hasn't been involved and engaged with our efforts before? And how do we make sure that all 4 of these people, consultants, ideas are brought to the table so that our programming is better? So belonging is a feeling that can be fostered and cultivated through authentic engagement by a culture that your organization can purposely create and retain. And this is also incredibly important as we think about our workforce. Several individuals may have heard of the Great Resignation or the fact that we have the lowest unemployment rate, but it's very difficult right now to be able to hire quality individuals that want to stay long-term with our organizations. So what we need to do is that the newer generation, they are thinking about the workforce very differently. They are considering whether or not spaces of employment are spaces where leadership is encouraging, is empowering, is inspiring, is making time to listen, to hear from the different community partners, from their internal employees. And they're wanting to know if the culture is the same as it has been for the last 50 years, or if in fact we are making room for the changing demographics of this new labor market. So again, it's important not only as we set the priorities for UEN, but also as we lead our teams. Are we ready to lead a different labor force that is going to be joining us? And the demographics of Utah are also changing. If you've read any of the new Kempsey Gardner reports, you would know that our generation, we have some of the youngest in the nation, right? Our babies are going to be entering the workforce here very soon. And the population looks differently. By 2065, 1 out of every 3 individuals will identify as a person of color. Our state is now 50% women and men. We also have a growing population of families that identify within the LGBTQ community. So as we think about all of those various demographics, what opportunities do we have to center and to ask, is our organization meeting the needs and creating spaces of inclusion, of diversity, of equity and access? So the ways that we're encouraging for people to be equipped through this new lens is to enable conditions for change, which is through leadership, learning and reflection, intentional investment, and connection and trust. Through leadership, what we are encouraging people to think about is the value of courage, compassion, conviction, commitment, and collaboration. Learning and reflection, it's challenging existing norms and working to learn, relearn, and unlearn. This has so much to do with bias, which is something that we all have, which again, anyone that has ever in any way been shamed or felt guilt when going through a training of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I apologize for those who are doing this work, because this work is meant to be about empowerment and really creating a space where all of us feel like this is part of the work that we do. So this really should be about leading with compassion and engaging people with deep empathy so that we understand their lived experience is very different than our own. And while we might have different political ideologies, faith experiences, lived experiences, it doesn't mean that we can't find a common ground to do good work. So with learning and reflection, again, addressing bias is critical. Intentional investment is about investing in meaningful progress through data transparency and resource allocation. So this is that, our opportunity to utilize data and be informed by what the data tells us. Who are we reaching and who are we not? Who have we been serving well and who have we not engaged with? And using that data to then consider, how do we allocate resources so that there is a more equal approach to the work and we can see people thriving everywhere?
So recently there was a meeting that the governor attended, and it was deeply powerful to hear him talk about how, yes, we are the #1 state in the nation for our economy. We are leading as it comes to economic mobility. We are leading as it comes to thriving for small businesses. But he said, if you look underneath the hood, you would notice that not everyone in our state has that narrative of success. And that gives us an opportunity to understand how we can look at those zip codes. We can look at those communities in rural Utah. We can look at our aging population, at our children. We can look at people who are willing and want to lean in to upskilling and leadership development, and how they would be able to now also be a part of that narrative of thriving for our state. But it requires data for us to know where we can improve, and it requires a deliberate and intentional approach to resource allocation. And then, of course, connection and trust. Building trust and relationships with people and communities through shared power and accountability. That means that we're asking the people when our policies are affecting them, what policies they need to be able to be positively impacted. How can we grow the table to make sure that that feedback loop is consistent and that people who we are serving are at the table with us, growing the direction, shaping the direction, and helping us understand where as an organization we need to go. So Leading for One Utah provides us with an opportunity to ask the hard questions, but to mobilize in a way where no one is left behind. And those were critical lessons that we learned during the pandemic, because when we were facing something that was unprecedented in our state, we consistently heard from our leaders that, we were learning as we went. We were building the plane as we went. But what was so wonderful and amazing to see from the administration and the governor and lieutenant governor recognize that we were using the same blueprint. So they paused and they pivoted and they started to look at the efforts that we were launching and we were moving forward with through a different lens that asked, if we're building the plane as we go, how do we add more seats to make sure that when we looked out the window, we didn't leave a single person behind, that everyone was able to survive this moment of chaos and crisis, and that they could get safely to the other side, right? So Leading for One Utah requires that compassion, that deep empathy, that intentionality, and a desire to say, how can we serve better? So the work that we've now been doing is more around leadership development, because at the end of the day, regardless of what we may feel from a political lens or faith lens, what we have an opportunity in positions of leadership is to ask, how do we better serve? And all of that is obviously informed by who we are and the experiences we have, but we also can build upon that through this lens of putting principles into actions of becoming inclusive leadership. And Harvard Business Review has done a lot of research around the 6 signature traits that make a leader inclusive. It is visible commitment. So people know that you are committed to doing the hard work of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, not just as posting something on your website, but they see this integrated into everything that you do. You are considering the people at the margins. You are thinking about the digital divide. You are thinking about the people who have cognitive and neurodiversity. You are considering folks that are linguistically diverse. You are thinking about people with chronic and invisible disabilities. We are thinking about the folks that oftentimes have not been thought of. So visible commitment allows for people to know your brand and to recognize that it is deeply integrated into the way that you do business. Then another trait is humility. We recognize we are not experts as this. I can tell you coming into this space, this is an ever evolving process of learning and unlearning how to do the work so that we grow the table and we bring people in a way that honors them. So humility is critical to leading teams through an inclusive posture. Awareness of bias, as we mentioned already, right? Many of us have had different lived experiences. We've lived different places. We've engaged, encountered, our educational experiences have been vastly different. And so being able to know that we all come to the table and to this space with bias and not feeling shame, not being judged for it, but just recognizing it's a huge opportunity for growth for each of us, right? So learning about where are our biases, where are opportunities for us to be able to shift the stereotypes and narratives we may have had about a community or about a gender or about a certain individual, so that we can create greater ways of working together and collaborating more efficiently. Curiosity about others, right? Being willing to lean in and ask questions, not necessarily to be able to position yourself as being right, but to learn and to grow your own understanding of the way that people navigate the world. Cultural intelligence and responsiveness. We recognize again that individuals are going to need very different things, and a one band-aid approach to things does not work. This again is why customizable service delivery is what's going to make us a more effective organization when we're working with children, when we're working with adult learners, right? Not everyone learns the same. Not everyone engages with our products the same. And so being able to create spaces where we can easily adapt and pivot will make us more, not only better leaders, but also better service deliverers. And then of course, effective collaboration, right? A willingness to know that we don't own this work, we don't do this work alone, but in fact, we can do this work together, because if we want to go far, we go together. So something else I wanted to share is that there is so much research out there that has consistently shown the benefits of leading with equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, of being inclusive leaders. Leading with expanding opportunity and equity is good business sense. It promotes a shared experience, broader perspective, nurtures a more positive workplace. We have understanding with clients and communities at an improved rate. It adds integrity to workforce and projects. We put actions behind our words. You know, after George Floyd, we saw an influx of organizations, corporations, business. I mean, everyone was posting their commitment to doing things different. Well, the problem is that, you know, this is a movement and not a moment. And we have now started to see people, you know, who started to shift away from some of that work because they were responding to the moment, but they didn't necessarily commit to doing this as part of the evolution of the work that's required. So putting action behind your words goes right back to that first part of visible commitment. It mirrors the market. It gives opportunities to everyone. It generates fresh insights, gains market and global appeal, encourages innovation, and we experience better retention. We see brand loyalty, but also people want to work for organizations where they see consistency, transparency, and a level of engagement that allows them to feel like their thoughts and their ideas were valued. So this is also about developing and maintaining a high quality workforce. So the way that we've been teaching about this within our organization at the division, but then also now as we're going to be releasing a resource that we've worked very closely with UEN on, it's a swinging door principle. It's not just enough to be able to ask, how are we serving people? Are we inclusive? Are we equitable in the way that people are engaging with our services? But we also have to think about, do our employees feel the same level of investment? So the swinging door principle allows us to ask, you know, who's benefiting from our initiatives and making sure that we are fair and equitable, even in the way that we develop the priorities for creating greater access and opportunities to experiences, to promotions, to services. So internally, those who belong in our organization, those are our brand ambassadors. And I want to very quickly share with you a story as to why this is so important. So recently, my mother had a really, it was a really awful fall, dislocated her hip, her spine. She was in awful pain, and it was a really scary experience for our family. And when she went to the hospital, she was there for several days. And she was asking for help from one of the nurses. And the nurse came in and she yelled at my mother and she said, "Don't you think I know you need help? So does everyone else on this floor." And she said, "We're trying. We are understaffed and we are overworked. We're trying. We'll get to you when we can." And what was interesting is that I had been working with this organization, this hospital, and they had a beautiful portfolio. And I just want to say that this hospital is out of state. So it's not Utah. Utah's actually doing pretty amazing. But this hospital was, their portfolio and their outward facing initiatives were incredible. Their messaging was on point. You know, the marketing was stunning. But what they had failed to do was internal development. Their employees, who are the brand ambassadors of everything that they were telling the community they were doing, were not being taken care of, right? So they were overworked, underappreciated, overtaxed. And so if we're not making sure that our employees are well, then it becomes a failed initiative when we try to roll out things, because they are the face of your organization that will make sure people understand the integrity and also the vision of what we have of driving this work forward. So once again, internal and external focus. So as we know that a lot of people are sometimes confused about where to get started, what to do, how to do this work, we have developed a guide for state agencies to develop opportunity action plans. And this comes on the heels of the governor issuing the governor's office of planning and budget. Every single state agency in governor's cabinet. So we are now tasked to develop a strategic plan by July 2023. And in there is to develop equity goals. But again, some folks have never done this work before. And so we wanted to make sure that we prepared people well, that they understood that this was about leadership. We were not wanting to make this political or make it about them versus us. This is about Utah. This is about leading for one thriving Utah. And so this guide is a 55-page document that provides case studies, principles, examples of internal and external initiatives. It allows you to understand what a completed opportunity action plan looks like. We want to make sure, again, that we're not just inspiring and empowering, but we are equipping leaders to do the work and move this forward. So this will be released here within the next couple of weeks. It is a project that we've been working on for a while. We wanted to have several partners review it to make sure that it was not only accessible, but that it was helpful, right? That this was not just one more toolkit, but in fact, it was a toolkit that could help guide a really special initiative that helps us reduce disparities in the state and allows us to be able to understand how to better serve the people in Utah. The other aspect I wanted to talk about is that this framework that we've created is a three-part prong. It's called data informed, opportunity driven, and people inspired. Data informed asks us, what data sets do we need to understand areas of opportunities and deep disparities? So once we look at the data, we are able to understand where are the gaps, who are we serving and who are we not. Opportunity driven is then able to be informed by that. So looking at the data, what areas of opportunities do we have to close the disparities so that we can better serve people? And people inspired, of course, is allowing us to lean into those important assets, our constituents and our employees. How do we better serve them so that we can create better outcomes for everyone? The other thing that I wanted to share that we're deeply proud of is our partnership with UEN. Katie Garrett and Jen Gibbs, I combined them, have been sisters in the movement, in the work. They have been integral in being able to launch this initiative. But we created a 10-day course that's called Leading for One Utah, and it centers inclusive leadership principles, but it also allows us to understand other areas of opportunities for us, such as creating space for self-reflection, such as understanding universal design and what that looks like to develop from inception programs and priorities that truly create opportunities for everyone. Because once we've developed initiatives and then tried to accommodate in the aftermath, it doesn't create a space of belonging because they weren't integrated. That individual, the needs of that community was not considered in the initial blueprint. So this allows us to pause and ask the questions of what would it take for us as an organization to truly create programs, priorities, and initiatives for every single person that lives in our state. Cognitive and neurodiverse, people of color, LGBTQ, aging individuals, folks with disability, people from different faith communities, linguistically diverse, people who are geographically diverse, right? And it's hard work, right? I will come with you with full transparency and share. It's hard work, but it is rewarding work to know that as leaders, we could shift and move the needle to a space where we as a community of leaders are deciding that we are leaving no one behind when we do our efforts. So this again is just an opportunity, a very quick overview, right? I knew that we only had a brief time together. But as I mentioned, you know, if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, we go together. The work that we do at the governor's office around EDIA is truly about collaboration. It is about building partnerships. It is about making sure that we as communities can come together and create solutions with the people most impacted by our policies. So if you are curious about the Leading for One Utah Inclusive Leadership training, it is almost ready to launch. You know, we do have all of the modules that have already been inputted. We are now just doing our final review. And so day one is focused on inclusive leadership. What is it and why does it matter? Day two is power up mindsets for inclusive leaders. Day three, self-awareness, unconscious bias. Day four, vulnerability, empathy, and courage. Day five, psychological safety and fostering productive dialogue. Module two is what inclusion looks like in practice. So access and allyship. Inclusion is incomplete without belonging. Inclusive community engagement and data collection, self-assessment, inclusive leadership, and Leading for One Utah. Understand and implement the expanding opportunity framework. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. I know that that was a lot of information, and I do thank you so much for your attention and engagement. But again, as you can see, what we're wanting to do is build up tools, make sure that there are projects, initiatives that can help people in leading this work. So with that, sir, I would just love to be able to ask anyone on the call if there are any questions that I can answer. Again, we went very fast, but I do hope that it was helpful to provide insights in terms of how we're leading this work. Chandra, hi, good morning.
Good morning. I just want to say thank you first to the board for providing this training. And then I just want to make a comment. Nubia Multicultural Affairs is one of our sister divisions in our department. And I've had the privilege with working with Nubia for 3 years now, Nubia. And we are so lucky in the state to have her. She is nationally recognized. The way she approaches, you can kind of see in her presentation, the way she approaches this and the time we live in is just phenomenal. And I have tapped her personally. I am just overjoyed to be able to call her friend and colleague. And I just want to thank the board for inviting her to come. And she is an extremely valuable resource. She is very generous with her time. She is packed full of things to do, but she is so generous, and Utah really is leading in this work thanks to her. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you, Nubia.
Thank you so much, Chandra. And I also just want to give credit to Chandra. Chandra is one of our members on the One Utah Council for Inclusive Leadership. So they were the ones that were integral in helping pull together all of these resources, as is Jennifer Gibbs and Katie Garrett from UETN. So we've got phenomenal leaders represented on the council helping shape the direction. But again, I hope more than anything, what you have gathered from this morning's quick overview is that there is a way to do this work without it feeling divisive, without it feeling shame-based and full of guilt. Every single one of you deserves to be at this table for us to lead this work together. And so again, this is a call-in, an invitation. This is an opportunity for us to collaborate. So if there are no other, are there any other questions in any way that
I'm going to jump in. This is Robert Wagner, and I'm chair of the board. I too would like to express sincere appreciation for you taking the time. Your expertise, professionalism is very apparent. I felt your passion about this also. And one question that I had was, it looks like there are a lot of materials that are available online, but might you be willing to make your PowerPoint available to members of the board? Because I was certainly sitting here taking pictures of slides. And I would love to be able to get a copy of that slide deck. Are you able to make that available to us?
Absolutely, sir. Anything that is mine is yours. So please know that the resources we discussed in the slides, I will gladly share with you, and the slide deck will be available to you as well. I'd be happy to share that with Laura.
Great, great. Thank you again. I'll just pause and see if any other members of the board have any questions or comments. Okay, Spencer.
Nubia, thank you. Really appreciate that training. I love how concise it is as well. Just one quick comment. I think it's a challenge oftentimes in these conversations to have governing boards to then translate this into operational terms. And so I would say to the board, please keep the accountability on us as staff to operationalize what these principles convey. And these training modules, I think, will be a great opportunity for us as those of us in our day jobs for this organization. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. And once again, I really appreciate you sharing space with me this morning. Those modules will be available soon for our community partners as well. And we've made them so that they're accessible throughout the day, 15 to 25 minutes, where you can plug in, and you can do this as a leadership team so that you develop together and you create a learning community. So again, anything that you need from me, I stand ready to support you. Thank you once again for your time. Have a beautiful day.
Great, thank you. Again, appreciate you and understand that you need to leave us now, but we hope to have further discussions and appreciate you. Thanks.
Take care.
Okay, that was fantastic training and very meaningful for us as a board. I think there are definitely further discussions, Spencer, that we can have as a board and certainly as an organization. I'm pleased to see the partnership that UETN is playing with this effort too. So any other comments, questions from the board? Please.
All right, this is Jared. So my thought is, now what? So what? So, and I know this is something that's taking a lot of effort, but I wonder if there might be some occasion in the course of our board meetings over the year to have some look at how are we doing with diversity, inclusion, equity, and so on. It's kind of a complex environment. A lot of it's going to fall at the operational level, right? So the organization is doing a great job with that. What are the objectives and how are we doing? We're talking about our clientele. How are we serving them? How are we presenting materials to them in our things that go out, our educational materials? How are we engaging various populations in the work that UETN does on telehealth and education? And then internally, how are we doing as an organization? Are we including diversity in our employees? And let's look at our board too. How do we address diversity there? So be good to have some follow-up on that at some point if there's some interest in that.
Thank you, Jared. I think just great comments. I think what we just experienced was very compelling. We can certainly just check the box and say that we received the training. We're good to go for another year, but we can tell from this presentation that this is part of a comprehensive effort by the state to move specifically agencies forward. I think there is a responsibility within and for our board to make sure that UETN is part of that process and part of that moving forward. So I would turn to Spencer and your team and ask that you perhaps look for opportunities in 2023 to come back and report to this board on ways that the Leading for One Utah effort is influencing and impacting UETN as an organization.
Yeah,
This is Kurt. I'd like to just make a suggestion. Before the meeting started, Denise sent out all the board materials, part of which were some advertisements or commercials, which are playing on our public TV and public radio. And perhaps this might be something where we could promote the awareness over those platforms statewide, just even if it's just through a form of a commercial, but just an idea.
Great, thank you.
And I mean, that in my previous life, Jared, we spent a lot of time with on the USHE side. I know a lot of our stakeholder organizations are doing a lot of work there. So I think there's two kind of main components for UETN to make sure we consider is that we're aware of what the goals are of our stakeholders and that we're cognizant of those and incorporating those into our service support to them. And then, like you said, internally with hiring and other policies. And we're fortunate because within Laura's group, we have Jen and Katie who've been involved very closely with Nubia. And so I think we have an easy way to draw on some expertise and incorporate it pretty quickly. And so I would say we will take up the challenge, but I think it's incumbent upon us organizationally to come back and reflect that back to our stakeholder organizations as well, that we're striving for that alignment for the goals that they have.
Great. So we will look forward then in 2023 to continued discussions and reports from the organization then to this board. Any other comments or questions?
Just really quickly, I'd love to see this included in our strategic plan in a way that we're seeing how these things all fit together. Every organization's asked to do so many things now and meet so many priorities. I really don't want to get lost on our main priorities and objectives on the whichever thing we're focused on this meeting kind of thing. So but I think this has to be a regularly reported item and something that we're looking at on a regular basis with our board.
Great, thank you, Dave. But Spencer, more feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I think, David, what you bring up is, I think we'll talk a little bit later, but I think there's a need for us to, even though we have a thriving and living strategic plan that we work from, this is one component that in my mind warrants, maybe we need to revisit and really go through a deep revision of that strategic plan.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. We will move on now in our meeting to our action items. Our first item of action is you have in board docs the notes from our September 28th meeting. And if there are no concerns or edits with those notes, I'd entertain a motion to approve them.
So moved.
Thank you, Steve. Is there a second? Thank you, Tad. All in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Notes the minutes then pass. Our next item of action are our board dates for 2023. As a leadership team, we spoke about these within the last week. You will notice as you review those dates that there are some slight modifications to what we've done in the past. I will say too that I believe we've gone through to make sure that there are no conflicts with public ed as well as state higher ed board meetings. Not saying that there aren't individual conflicts perhaps with each of us, but we tried as much as possible to coordinate calendars. You will see the dates for 2023 are February 10th, April 14th, June 9th. And then one change we have decided, typically we have a meeting in August, but we felt that perhaps 2 meetings during the summer months might be challenging for members of the board. We felt that that August date might actually be more challenging than the June date. So we will limit board meetings during the summer to 1 date in June, which would then put our board retreat on September 15th. And once again, we can have an action item portion of our board retreat if we need to, especially if there are any needs related to budget approval or anything like that. Then we would have a fairly quick turnaround to an October 13th meeting. And then as we get closer, you will see we're going to leave open November 29th or December 6th as a board's choice for our last meeting for 2023. Any questions or comments? Spencer?
Real quickly, Mr. Chair, if I could just, so we had talked about September 15th as a retreat, and one question we didn't have answered was if there was a USHE board meeting. It looks like there is one that week. And so we had alternatively thrown out September 22nd
Okay.
as a potential date for that retreat.
Why don't we go ahead, just to avoid the conflicts, why don't we go ahead and make a change to September 22nd? And I'll propose that to the board. So February 10th, April 14th, June 9th, September 22nd, October 13th, and then either November 29th or December 6th. As we get closer to that date, we will decide as a board.
There are board committee meetings on for higher ed in April on the 14th. So
On the
I don't
14th.
know that
But
that's
those are
not
committees,
ready, but I'll probably have a copy there.
Okay. So you might not have heard Jared announce there are some state higher ed board committee meetings on the 14th. So it's possible a few of our higher ed reps, there could be a conflict there. One of the other things that I was going to propose, though this doesn't need to be part of the action, we have a tradition of doing meetings in the morning. I am wondering if it might be interesting and good to mix that up and maybe look at perhaps an afternoon meeting occasionally. That might also avoid some of the conflicts that might be out here with some of those dates. So I'm going to leave that option open and we will work with staff. But being proposed to this board for an action item are those dates. Again, February 10th, April 14th, June 9, September 22nd, October 13th, and November 29th or December 6th. I would entertain a motion to approve these dates of meetings for 2023.
Make that motion.
Jared, thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second. It's Kurt.
Thank you, Kurt. Any discussion? Would there at least be some interest in exploring different times of day for these meetings? Perhaps just give me a thumbs up if that might be appealing to you with your schedules to look at an occasional afternoon meeting instead of morning on these dates. There be some interest. I saw one thumbs up.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
great. And some hands too. David?
Just a quick comment on that. I like the idea of afternoon meetings, but a Friday afternoon meeting is a bad idea for a lot of reasons for K-12 folks.
Yeah.
Okay, we will keep that in mind and be judicious with that. Thank you. Okay, we have a motion before the board to approve these dates. All in favor of that motion, please raise your hand. And any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you very much, David. We'll get some feedback from members of the board. We'll be careful with those afternoon dates. I don't want to, of course, negatively impact our public ed representatives on the board. Typically, though, if there are things like state committee meetings or things like that, those tend to be more in the morning. So it's possible that maybe once or twice during the year, an early afternoon meeting might be beneficial. And so we'll explore those options.
Hey, Robert,
Okay.
I had my hand up to make a discussion point before the vote.
Oh, okay.
But
I am sorry.
I just didn't want to barge in. I was just trying to follow protocol by raising my hand. But
it's, the screens are a little small and I don't have my far away glasses, so feel free to barge for
Okay.
any members of the board.
I was gonna make a recommendation that we choose November 29th as our date and get that set now instead of having two dates between the 29th and the 4th. But if there's people that want the 4th, then I would be fine with that. But it would be best for me to get it on my calendar so that I can work things around when scheduling items.
And so Jason, thank you very much. It is certainly within your right, now that we've had a motion that is passed to approve these dates. If you would like to officially make that motion to the board to officially accept November 29th as that last meeting date, I will entertain that.
I would make a motion to set November 29th as our meeting date for the final meeting in 2023.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, David, thank you. Any discussion? And please jump in if there is discussion.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
hearing no
Dr.
discussion.
Nunez, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. It has been a pleasure. Hearing no discussion, we will put this to a vote. Then the
Fantastic. I
motion
look forward to it.
is to select November 29th as our date, as our final meeting date for 2023. All in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay. November 29th, we will take December 6th then off the previous motion.
Go.
And November
Go lay down.
29th
Some soup.
will be our final one. Just want to remind
Makes me feel better.
members on the Zoom call to check and make sure that you are muted. We would appreciate that very much with the number of participants that are on the Zoom call. We now will move to our next action item, which is an advisory council appointment. This is for telehealth. Members of the Telehealth Advisory Council recommend that the board appoint Zach Robinson as a new member of the Telehealth Advisory Council. You have Zach's bio in the agenda. I guess I would ask Matt, if Matt, you're on, if you have anything to say about this this recommendation for action.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you've
Thanks.
read Zach's bio,
I'm
you
glad to
can
be here.
tell that
And I
he's
wanted to say
great.
Brian, but I didn't want to I didn't want to keep Dr. Nunez
Like we're
any
getting
longer.
some background.
I'm around.
Are we able to mute?
There we go.
Thank you. Okay, thanks.
If you've looked at Zach's bio, he's a great addition to the advisory council. He's the senior operations manager for the virtual care team in the Office of Network Development and Telehealth at the University of Utah. So we are looking forward to working with Zach.
Great.
I have a question.
Matt, yeah, Ted, please.
Is he replacing Nate Gladwell, or is he in addition to Nate Gladwell?
Nate Gladwell is not actually on the advisory council. It was Nate Creer formerly.
Oh.
And Nate Creer has moved on, I understand. So Nate Gladwell actually gave us a recommendation for Zach to serve in that position.
Terrific. He'll do a great job.
Great. Thank you, Tad. Is there a motion to appoint Zach Robinson to the Telehealth Advisory Council?
So moved.
Thank you, Tad. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Steve. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. We welcome Zach to the Telehealth Advisory Council. We'll now move to our next item of action. These are policy actions that the board we have had a tradition of as an action, doing an annual affirmation or reaffirmation of these policies. Spencer or Laura, would one of you like to present these?
Sure, these are primarily tied to the broadcast requirements that we face. But so I'll let Laura, if you don't mind going through those, and that'd be helpful.
Sure, these are required. Hello, everyone. These are required by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So most of them are pretty standard, and the board previous years has already approved them. With one exception, the diversity policy and diversity hiring goals used to be two different policies, and we're seeing other stations now combining those into one document. So that would be a change. And also based on this morning's discussion with Nubia, that's a living document. So the board can always go back and revise this, but we are required to have a diversity policy passed annually, which would be today.
Okay, great. Thank you. You have links to those policies. I hope that you have reviewed them. We can either do this each policy, we can have a motion for each policy, or we can do them as a group. If we were to do them as a group, it would be the closed captioning policy, accessibility, the electronic meetings policy, the editorial integrity policy, and then what are we calling the diversity that's joined with the diversity hiring goals? Are they just diversity goals policy?
Diversity policy.
Diversity policy. Okay. Any preference from members of the board on how we do this? I would certainly entertain a motion either way. Okay, why don't we propose that it doesn't sound like there's a preference, so I'm going to submit that we entertain a motion to accept these five or to reaffirm these five policies as a board. Is there a motion to do that?
So moved.
Thank you, Steve. Is there a second?
Second.
Who was that? I'm sorry, I didn't see.
Christina. Sorry, I'm not feeling well, so I'm.
Oh, okay. Christina, thank you very much. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Say aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. The motion passed. The motion passes. Our next item of action is a retreat follow-up. This came out from our time well spent together, and I believe, Spencer, you're going to talk about this proposal to the board.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to everybody who participated. It being October, we know it was a busy time and it was a day long, but it was incredibly meaningful. I think on a couple of fronts. To get back together in person was really helpful. And then the ideas to cover, I think me being a new executive director, it was helpful to me to get that feedback from board members. I think there's a lot of new faces on the board. And so I think it was a refreshing of kind of perspectives around what UETN, or perceptions, if you will, around what UETN is and does. And I think that was a helpful starting point. What we gathered from that was that there's a lot of great services that UETN does, but the forward-looking perspective maybe isn't as defined as it could be for a number of reasons. One, there's a lot of emerging technologies that we haven't quite put our arms or gotten our arms around in terms of what is it going to be for the future for UETN. But second, it's not really clear that we have sort of captured or internalized what the strategic priorities are of our stakeholders. I think we have some awareness in individual areas. For example, in our professional development area, they work closely with counselors. On our network area, they know what the network needs are for maybe LEAs or at the higher ed level. But taking that to a kind of a more broader perspective, as board members and as the business leadership of those stakeholders, not sure that we've fully captured what what our obligations or our plans should be for the future in connection with what our stakeholder priorities are. So with that, we've talked internally, and what we're envisioning is maybe is getting some outside help from a consultant. And the way I've been describing it is kind of in this magic space between not messing with board governance, that's not what we're trying to suggest, and not messing too much with operations. Within UETN, there are some incredible things going on. And we'll talk about that in just a minute in my report, but there is a space though where we haven't glued together a lot of the incredible things going on well enough to represent strategically what UETN needs to be doing going forward. And that's where we feel like some outside help could help us do that, both internally, but also then to go look out among our stakeholders and start gathering exhaustively some information that says, here's where public ed needs are going to be. And then capturing this conversation we kind of just briefly touched on with Nubia Pena. For example, digital equity. What does digital equity really mean for UETN? And what are some things we need to be planning in the ground over the next 1 to 5 years in that area? And I think we have a sense of that, but really putting that down into how do we operationalize that? And so what we're proposing is your support in going forward with a consultant that we would enlist to help kind of move us in my mind, to the next version of our strategic plan, but in a way that it has a little more operational depth for us to build this out going forward. So with that, I'll stop and see if there's questions or discussion. I think there may be quite a few.
Thank you. There are in your agenda towards the end of the description of this action item, you will notice that there are 4 bullet points. Those are specific things that the staff have come up with, objectives, if you will, that would be presented to the consultant. I want to make sure I appreciate those 4 bullet points. I think they're fairly tight. It's always good, those of us who have experience with consultants, to give them some direction when they come in and let them know things that we are looking for and questions that we have. So I will refer the board to those bullet points and then open it up for discussion and comments.
I have a question. This is Chandra.
Please.
And Spencer, I think you touched on this, but with the consultant, part of what they would do is engage all the different stakeholders that are part of UETN or that might be able to give some input on UETN services directly with each group, right?
You bet. Yes, that would be one of 2 major parts that we're envisioning on the scope here is getting out to stakeholders and really capturing what your input is, and kind of hopefully getting in a little bit to understand your business so that so they can help us get a sense of alignment.
I could see, Spencer, I would imagine if an RFP is issued and then awarding the contract to a consultant, we would probably be looking at a start date sometime in the spring.
Yeah, we're hopeful. First quarter is kind of where we've marked it. Okay. So hopefully it's before March.
So the reason why I'm asking is I think it would be good once the consultant's report comes out. I think this board would want to be able to spend a considerable amount of time with that report and reviewing it. We have our retreat later in September, later in the year. I'm not sure we would want to wait that long to review and really dig into the consultant's report. So that's just something for the board to think about, how we might be able to engage with the final outcome of the report and really dig in as a board.
Yeah, so timeline wise, what we hope is to have at least some preliminary findings for that September meeting, because obviously as you think through a school year, if we get them too late after the holiday break here, we're going to be on a short fuse with a lot of key partners if we don't get something going before, say, April-ish.
Jared, please.
So yeah, I think this is a great idea. It's probably time to do that. I'm curious, has this been done? And if so, how long ago? Also, what does the budget look like? I guess there's any level of scope you could go to on something like this, but Are we okay on budget for whatever kind of level of look that we have there?
Yes,
And-
thank you for asking about, sorry, I didn't cut you off, didn't you?
Oh, no, yeah, just one other comment on the 4 bullets there. It's probably embedded in that first one and probably throughout. I don't know if it needs to be called out, but I would hope the consultants would look at some of the things we talked about earlier in this meeting with diversity and inclusion. So,
Yeah, the copy of the RFP, to answer that question, yes, does include diversity and equity and inclusion as a specific component of what they would look at. Budget wise, we've allocated roughly $100,000 to $150,000 in one-time funds. We think will hopefully cover this. And I'm forgetting now your first question. 2 questions. And oh yes. So there's been a number of times at UETN where consultants have done some work. At the full organization level, I would say there's been some, I guess, surface level strategic planning, which has been helpful. I think the last major one was in 2015. There's been a lot of work underneath that in specific areas that we hope will be actually helpful to these consultants, so they're not flying blind. I think to the chair's comments, we plan to be very engaged with these consultants to make sure the scope doesn't go completely off the rails. And we've also envisioned it being somewhat iterative, that as they see some initial findings, we'll be able to say, okay, well, that's helpful. We want to guide it down this path or go here, because you're exactly right. These kinds of consultants, you can go broad really fast, and all of a sudden you've got a scope that they're throwing everything in on because they see the financial benefit that can create for them as a consultant. So it will be, I envision it being a highly managed consultant experience with the leadership team at UETN. So hopefully that is something we can give even periodic updates to the board on at subsequent meetings.
Great. Other questions, discussions?
Yeah, Spencer, just a question. Will part of the report also include the legislature and what their priorities are, or what they might be for UETN, and making sure that those funds and funds from the federal government, is that going to be something that they would look at as well?
Yes, so we do have in the scope for them to look at how UETN is funded and its funding model. That may require us engaging some legislators. I guess to also counter that, to say, I don't think we're going to go full engagement with legislators, because I think that can also bring in a bunch of other ideas that may not be related to the scope or what the statute puts in place for UETN. But going forward, there may be some things from the board's perspective that comes to light that says, maybe we need to approach the legislature to change this or to adjust this. And that's what I hope may be a subsequent, I don't know if I don't envision getting another consultant for that, but some legislative considerations as we get findings from a consultant.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, the legislative language that kind of set up the UETN could be consolidated and tuned up a little bit. And I wondered if that might be an outcome of this.
Yes, I think there'll be some potential recommendations there.
And we've talked about cybersecurity. Would that probably be one major initiative, and maybe doesn't need to be specified specifically, but certainly that's going to be a big part, I suppose, of what you might be doing in the future.
Yeah.
Any other discussions or questions? So because this report, I believe, will be a great resource for this board, we have decided to make this an action item. So the proposal before the board would be to direct Spencer and his team to issue and award an RFP accordingly. And I will entertain a motion right now to that effect.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Jared. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Greg. Any discussion?
I like what Spencer said. It's going to be iterative, and as you get through it, you'll have to make sure it gets specific as to what you want it to actually, the reporting and how it's going to roll out, so that you'll get what you need. But with that consideration, yeah, I think this will be good.
Sounds like we'll be ready at least for some update at our next meeting then in 2023. So any other discussion? Okay, motion has been forwarded and seconded. All in favor, please raise your hand. And any opposed? Thank you. The motion passes. We look forward to hearing more about this report.
Thank you.
That concludes our action items. We're now going to move to the discussion portion of our agenda. Let me set up the first in 3.1 advisory council adjustments. You will see in the agenda there are several suggestions and ideas that have been forwarded to you. What this is regarding is, as a leadership team, we have been wondering if the board is really benefiting as much as we can from our advisory councils, and what and how could we benefit more from the great work that's being done within these councils. We hear reports as a board, but could there be more engagement? And could there be more involvement between advisory councils and the board itself? What would that look like? So there are a number of ideas that have been put forward in the agenda. What I would like to do, and this is not an action item, I guess I'm asking for your feedback. What I would like to propose to the board, and I'm not doing this because she's not here, I did ask her first, but our co-chair, Patty Norman, I've asked if she would be interested in leading a subcommittee of the board in exploring this topic of advisory council and how, as a board, we can benefit more from their efforts and how we can be more engaged. Patty has agreed to take that on. And so I'd like to propose to this board that that's how we move forward here in the first part of 2023, is allow Patty and those who will work with her to take this on more specifically. Speak with members of our advisory councils, get their input and feedback, certainly listen to members of the board, and then come back to this board with more concrete recommendations. I would welcome any discussion about that.
So, Mr. Chair, I would suggest that that's a good idea to have members of the board interacting with these committees. Before becoming a board member, I have been on the advisory committee, the UETN advisory committee for, Rick, I can't remember, about a year. But something I think that would be good is to have that engagement from board members with our committees, and then make it an item that is reported back on how that work is happening with each committee, and make that a responsibility of, you know, the board members assigned to those committees.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. Other thoughts?
I would maybe suggest that, as we did with the schedule for the board meeting, that the advisory board meeting dates of meetings are set out a year in advance as well, so that we can get them on our calendars. That, you know, for that would be helpful as well.
Great, thank you, Tad.
So Robert, how does this relate to the study we're going to do as well? Is this something that the consultants would look at, what you find out, or how did the two relate?
Well, so I thought what we would do, and thank you, Steve. I actually wondered about that too, if the two might emerge. What I would recommend is, we have a lot of experience just on this board with those who experience not only working with boards, but working with similar models like advisory councils or subcommittees. One of the reason why I reached out to Patty Norman is she has a significant amount of experience herself on the public ed side and on the board. What I would like to propose is not only has she agreed to take on this subcommittee to look at these things, but actually see who in this meeting right now as members of the board might be willing to serve on that subcommittee with her and allow them to do some work the first part of 2023. And then Steve, as the contract is awarded with the RFP, if there's a merger of these ideas, we could certainly look at that. But I suspect and have a feeling that Patty, the experience that she has and members of this board, that they will come back, that subcommittee will come back with very good recommendations.
Okay, makes sense.
So are there members of this board that would be willing to serve on this subcommittee? And I apologize for calling him out, but Jason, I have to, after listening to your comments and your experience as an advisory council member, would that be something that you would be willing to join Patty on?
Yeah, I'd be happy to help out.
I just put you on the spot, so I appreciate that. You could have said no, and I would have been okay with that. But your experience, I think, would be very helpful. Are there other members of the board who would be willing to participate? Chandra, thank you. David, Denise, if you could make notes of this. So we have Jason, Chandra, and David who have volunteered. Any others? It looks like Greg has as well. Wonderful. Thank you. If anyone else is interested in joining Patty in that subcommittee, if you could let Denise know, she will send the names on to Patty, and I suspect as we launch into 2023, she will be reaching out, and then we'll look for that subcommittee to report back to the board in perhaps the first half of 2023. Okay. Thank you for that. We will now move on to reports, and we'll start with our executive director report. Spencer.
Thank you. Oh, good, it's there. So I have to say, in our planning meeting with Chair Wagner and Co-Chair Norman, I was pushing to not have an executive director report, but they were very quick to tell me this is a great way to hold me accountable. So this hopefully conveys some accountability of what I'm doing, and I'm not hopefully just sitting around too much. But it also is reflective of a lot of what's going on in UETN. And so I did want to highlight a number of things that have occurred in the last few months, primarily since summertime. There's a lot that has been going on. Some you may not be aware of, some you may not. I think a very significant one, the network, there was installed a switch or circuit, if you will. This is getting in the technical weeds, and Jim, you can jump in here, but a 400 gig circuit was installed between the downtown data center and where we connect out to the internet. I think this is one of 3 in the country, and a very big one, but also is in working to keep up with the demand of the network. So that was a big milestone for the network itself. It doesn't get a lot of visibility, but over the years, I think it's been maybe 10 or 15 years that we were talking about 10 gig, and here we are now at 400 in such a short amount of time. It only conveys, you know, what we try to anticipate for the future. Similarly, we passed 27 petabytes on the network as the school year started in terms of traffic. By my loose math, if you take the most high-end iPhone, it's about 13,000 of those put together in terms of data movement. So there's quite a bit going on the network. We also are in the middle of a renewal for the learning management system license, which is currently Canvas for K-12. That's a very big contract that should wrap up early 2023. Is that right, Laura? So on the sustainability side, Michael Shooping's group is in the middle of going through RFPs for contracts on the E-rate side. He's wrapped up those on the telehealth side. This, to me, being new into the organization, I think is one of the more significant areas that I think is not readily seen, is the amount of work on the procurement side that we do for the network. As Jim is quick to point out to me, that the network is a series of many, many networks, and we work closely with a lot of providers across the state. And each year there are hundreds of contract renewals for these connections throughout our network. And this, I think, is one of the reasons why UETN's model works so well. Other states don't have a centralized entity to coordinate E-rate connections like this. Because of that, we're able to drive down pricing. It's a huge value we provide back to LEAs and USHE or colleges and telehealth connections and libraries, and hopefully saves a lot of legwork on the administrative side to apply not only for the E-rate eligibility, but to then do the contract negotiation with these providers. So it's a significant amount of work, but I would say this is why UETN can price things so well. Periodically, an LEA will come forward and ask to get their own circuit and other things. And in most cases, they will find that UETN's pricing is the best. And so what I think is neat is there's no obligation that any of our stakeholders have to use the network, but it's by far the best deal and the best support they get. So to me, that speaks to the model that has long been around, and I think it's important to highlight. On the broadcast side, the FCC license was renewed. It's a 10-year renewal, so that's a major milestone that we will continue with that license for the next 10 years. On the telehealth side, Matt and his team hosted a very successful conference earlier this year, kind of its own for this area. They had really good engagement. They had participation from folks at the CDC, raised and discussed a lot of good policy questions around telehealth. I would call it, I don't know if you can call this something emerging in healthcare because of sometimes how challenging it can be to navigate that bureaucracy, but emerging technology and emerging service in healthcare. And it's neat to see the conversations that continue to grow around telehealth. Similarly, they deployed, this is kind of, I guess, a coolness factor, but because of the remoteness of Kane County, Kurt, there's a satellite backup connection that's being deployed and piloted to see if that can help in the connectivity of that area. On the professional development side, the beginning of the year, there was a class or module for school leaders that superintendents of others have had a lot of interest in. It's gotten a lot of good traction in its initial run. It's done in partnership with our schools like SUU and Utah State. And it's so far it's gone quite well. Also along those lines, we've been approached by the University of Utah to look at supporting them as they develop college readiness models. And I know this isn't a new conversation at UETN, but what I think is appealing with this is they want these modules to be widely available and also to be widely coordinated. So widely available in the K-12 arena, but to also pull in higher ed folks from across the spectrum to help develop the curriculum. What I like about this, it's intended to be flexible. So these modules can be applied and used in a sort of pick and play sort of way. I know over the years, there's always been an attempt to have a, soup to nuts application that all students should adopt. I think their approach is much more focused on equity. And with that, going into the equity realm and finding where those needs exist in a more customized way.
So Spencer, if I could ask a question about that Canvas course, is that to support the USHE initiative with more college readiness advisors and counselors in the high school? I guess what my question is that a U of U branded Canvas course, or is that something that USHE is supporting as well?
So it comes from the same office that oversees the college access advisors on behalf of USHE, but it will not be U of U branded. It's with
it's part of that college access initiative.
And even more broad than that, because the college access initiative is one component, and so they're doing it in conversation with that, but it will sit more broadly there.
Great.
UETN branded.
Because it's on, yeah, licensed stuff. On the operations side, this may not be of as much interest, but there's a few things we're trying to do to sort of standardize some procedures, if you will. One of them is on our annual budget process. It's not that that hasn't existed, but we are trying to bolster that just a little bit more to ensure our managers have a little more latitude and ability to manage their budgets in relation to changes and things that come up. Not unlike what you probably experience in a lot of your organizations, but it'll be somewhat standardized and I think a little bit easier to coordinate some key initiatives that way. Along with that, performance evaluations that's been done in limited ways or in different ways across the organization. We're going to sort of standardize that around the University of Utah's policy since we're their employees, and same thing with job descriptions. The Humans of UETN series, you're probably aware of some of the videos that were done publicly featuring some of our employees and former board members and directors. Along with that, being a hybrid work group or organization, it's a monthly or maybe it's a bi-weekly thing. I can't remember now. I'm thinking about the different events that are scheduled where each one of our functions is scheduled. It's sort of a lunch and learn event, but it's also been a way to kind of bring our organization together in a virtual way that doesn't happen. So it's organization wide. That happens at smaller levels as well. But those are some things we're trying to do to as we're in our new normal of we'll always have a hybrid component to what we do as a staff that trying to bring together in a community sort of way. The other piece is we have started a couple of internships in Laura's group. I feel like this is a great opportunity for us as well as for students. I hope we can continue to expand that. I think there's a lot of opportunities. We had a lot of interest, it sounds like, from these initial ones, and we'll grow into those a lot more going forward. And then just real quickly, I didn't want to go through unless you want me to. We do have some dashboards as well as the strategic plan is there to look. That's where we give some updates on our metrics, which we have as part of the current strategic plan. There's additionally, you can go deep dive into what Matt has on the telehealth side. He has some really good data that's a little more granular than our performance indicators. But I don't want to take that time unless you're interested in it, but those links will be where these slides are posted.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Unless there's a board member that would like to ask us to dive into these, let's make sure at least the URL links are available to the board.
Okay. Just a couple things to highlight in terms of challenges, and then we'll shift into some of the legislative stuff. Just an update. I think you're aware we're still waiting on these funds, this latest tranche of federal funds. We did see last week that Utah is starting to receive those in other areas. And so we anticipate hopefully something that means some movement on the US Treasury side. So hopefully something does happen here in the near future. Just a quick update on a significant project for the network that's been out there for several years. It's one we are continuing to work on. We feel like we're getting ever so by millimeters closer. This is a fiber connection down into the Navajo Nation. We did have in Monument Valley some connections that did light up these last couple of months, which was a big step forward. The next piece here is a partnership with UDOT that we're trying to get done. There's a few approvals we're working on to get permitting with the Navajo Nation, and then we're hopeful we can move on with the getting potentially an extension with the FCC because of the delays that are here. But this is a significant connection that would go from, it's sort of the last part of the microwave parts of our network, and it would be a significant step to improving connections into that area. Just over the weekend, I don't know if you saw, there was a news story on KSL about the distance that people in that area of the state they have to drive to get pulmonary services. This is something where if telehealth was part of that, it could help mitigate some of those challenges. And then the last three are more broad ones, but they are ongoing ones. Jim is at a conference right now, just because this is where the UETN network is. Our network has grown a lot the last few years as it's deployed new and robust circuits because of funding. It is a very robust network, but also raises some fragility and future planning questions. There are not a lot of networks across the country like ours. where expertise exists and so on. And so we do need to do some planning around the network. Same thing with new technologies. I think this board has heard a lot of presentations in recent years about the new technologies that are emerging. We're keeping eyes on those. We'll have some updates in upcoming board meetings about those, but they are real technologies in the wireless area. There's really some major investment by both technology companies and other major national companies in these technologies that we need to keep an eye on. And then I've put centralized operational coordination and documentation, a lot of kind of mumbo jumbo management words, but I would say what it is, and this ties into the consultant. Throughout our organization, there are some amazing things going on, some great processes, but they haven't been brought together in a real centralized way. And that's where I hope this consultant will really help us. And it's where we have a lot of the challenges. And where I always kind of harp on it is, if I go to a superintendent or someone at a USHE institution, I'm not sure without a lot of legwork, we could very quickly say, here are all the services we're providing and how well they're doing. And I feel like that's kind of where we're trying to drive a lot of this kind of operational improvement. So that was just a quick note on challenges that we're working through. We do have a group that's helping us on this operational side to kind of pull together. We have a number of different tools we're using. I'm sure it's not unlike what you see on a university campus, but we also have a lot of great expertise. So I do think that'll help feed our consultants that we won't be reinventing the wheel on a lot of this operational stuff. Just a real quick note on a few things with the legislative session. A lot of this, many of you may know, but I did want to make sure you're aware of where things are in relation to UETN. As of last session, that was the first session that UETN began reporting to a new committee. They did away with the Retirement and Independent Entities Committee. So we're now part of the Infrastructure and General Government Appropriations Subcommittee. There's some great opportunities there. It also presents some challenges. It's a more visible committee, which means some opportunities will be good for us there. The challenge is that it also has some very big items like buildings. The Department of Technology Services also, or Division of Technology Services also reports to this committee. So I'm a little worried about confusing us and them and what we do in relation to them, which will be important to distinguish. Here are some key dates. In a couple of days, the governor will release his budget priorities. We'll see where our priorities landed within his recommendations. And then next week, the Executive Appropriations Committee will revise their revenue projections for going into the session. We'll touch on some numbers here. The first day of the session starts on the 17th. First part of the session is our budget presentations, and then we'll watch for those budget final revenues. Steve, did you have a comment or question?
I'm just wondering, do we have any idea of what the revenues are like? They're pretty good, aren't they? At least one.
Great question. So here are the numbers they adopted in November. I don't know if they'll change next week, but these, as they've done the last 3 or 4 years, these revenues continue to exceed the previous years. They're the highest we've seen. I mean, a $1.2 billion ongoing increase in the education fund. Last year, it blew me away when it hit 900 million. So it continues to go up. They're talking about tax cuts. I don't know what other tax policy revisions they might be considering, but there is significant funding there. The other thing that I think is worth noting, and Jared, maybe you can weigh in, capital development has usually been a popular use for one-time funding from the education fund. I know on the USHE side, that process has changed. There may not be as many buildings on the table. In a conversation I had with Senator Wilson, who's the chair of our budget committee, he made the same comment. That may present an opportunity, or at least around our budget priorities, to get a little more visibility, at least for this session. But I don't know if you have any other insights on the building side, but.
And Spencer, ARPA funding and the federal money, is that going to play out in the legislature as well, or will it be as a separate item?
Right now, it's being viewed as a separate item. The legislature already acted on that funding that we're just waiting on from the feds. It sounds like the money that did come in recently is just going directly to those eligible recipients. So I don't anticipate a lot of kind of legislative interest at this point. They've got other things on their plate, I think. But Jared, did you have?
Oh, no, you're talking about the buildings and higher ed. Yeah, the new process for higher ed really emphasizes what's called the dedicated fund that each institution is on an annual basis appropriated a certain amount of money, and they're expected to manage their building projects within those funds to as much as possible. And so they have the Board of Higher Education will refer a maximum, I think, of one building project that's outside of that for the whole state. So there's a lot of interest in keeping those within those institutionally managed funds there.
And those building requests go to the same appropriations subcommittee, so that I think it'll change some of the dynamics on our behalf. And just as a quick note, the committee assignments were released last week. We do have a new House Chair, Representative Stratton out of Utah County. I plan to reach out to him in the next week or so to see if he's willing to sit down. If any of you are ever interested in joining any of those appointments, if you want me to send you a list of who I'm pursuing to get scheduled.
Yeah, and so I was going to, just before we close the meeting today, I was going to invite you to send out to the board some key dates of committee meetings, any information like that, if there are board members that would like to participate. Certainly, I have done my best to come down when we present, do our budget request and main presentation. I would be happy to join.
And we may get those dates next week when the committees meet. The last couple of years, they haven't gotten them out to us until January.
Yep.
So as soon as those committees are scheduled, we'll definitely get those out. And if you'd like, I'll send a periodic note that just says, here are the individual legislators I'm meeting with, especially across the state. If they're ones you know very well, it'd be great to have you in that conversation. It's usually a lunch appointment or something just in passing as we are going to another meeting nearby, but would love to have board participation there. So
great.
Just a quick note on legislative topics. It's tough to know at this point how much of this will directly impact UETN. There is I know I've noticed a couple of bills around information security, for example, or school safety. There's one on reading materials. I understand there's a higher ed governance bill that has specific topics around shared governance, shared services, which may impact UETN, especially Steve, in relation to the request that the board prioritized relating to information security. So this is more of an informal list, but to help kind of guide and help us keep our watchful eyes out on potential bills that impact UETN. And that's something, of course, as it starts to evolve and get more information, we'll definitely give you those updates.
I'm just curious, social media?
It's a bill request I caught the other day related to social media use in the statute more broadly. It's not education related, but I wonder what that means in terms of telcos having to police social media, which could impact UETN given our relationship with so many telcos. But Rick, sorry.
Follow up. I know that Governor Cox is very concerned about social media use by particularly high school students and junior high school students, and has held several meetings and will be holding a summit sometime in I think it's in early January on social media and the impact on particularly on youth and that. So it's also become a topic for the Digital Wellness Citizenship and Safe Technology Commission, which I serve on.
So it could lead to some kind of legislation that would at least
could be, maybe put some onus back on social media companies. They're allowing accounts for students that they shouldn't be.
Yeah, particularly Facebook, Snapchat, and what's the other one? Anyway, there's a lot of movement in that area, a lot of interest because there's been new ownership with some of those social media companies as well.
Spencer, thank you very much. Appreciate that report. We'll be eager to receive updates as we get closer to the legislative session then. We're going to move on to our advisory council reports. I want to be sensitive to the time of this scheduled meeting. So I realize what I'm going to ask next is entirely contradictory of our previous discussion about the board benefiting from advisory councils. However, due to the timing of our meeting this morning, I am going to ask each advisory council representative to just take a few minutes each, please. We'll move forward. We'll start with telehealth and Matt.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I did want to just share my screen for 1 second. If you ever want to look at our dashboard and see a quick snapshot of what's happening with telehealth in the state, this is a great place to come. It's right on the UTN website. This dashboard, this chart in particular, shows what's happened with total telehealth claims across the state over time. Before COVID started, we were at about 0.5% of all medical claims were telehealth. At the height of the pandemic, it got up to 43%, and it's slowly tapered off, as you can see, to about 12 to 13% right now, which is still very significant in terms of total claims, medical claims statewide. 12 to 13% is still telehealth. So we'll be tracking that, and I shared this with the advisory council. The other thing, the advisory council, we at our retreat in October, some of the council members asked me to invite the Utah Medicaid director to come. So in our meeting last week, Jennifer Strohecker, the director of Medicaid, was able to attend and give an update on Medicaid policies, specifically as they relate to telehealth. Two things that I think you'll find really interesting. Medicaid heavily supports audio only visits. They realize that there's a significant portion of the population that doesn't have high-speed internet, and a phone call with a provider is their best access, and in particular for mental health services. Spencer talked about legislation coming up regarding mental and behavioral health. That's going to be really big, I think, in this legislative session, and continuing to support audio only is a big thing that Medicaid is focusing on. Right now, the public health emergency at the federal level is set to end on January 11th. We don't think it will, but we're pretty sure they'll renew it another 90 days. The federal government is supposed to give a 60-day notice before they end the public health emergency. That's still very important for telehealth statewide, because a lot of the increased access that was happening during the pandemic, some of it will stay in place when the public health emergency ends. Some of it will go away, and it will impact the amount of telehealth that's being done. But we'll just have to watch and see exactly how much. So I gave an update on the network. Spencer covered a lot of those updates, what's happening on the network. Spencer also mentioned our conference that we held in September. We did review upcoming the meeting schedule for 2023. So we will go back and re-review those dates and make sure they line up with the new dates for the board meetings. And I think I'll end there.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Once you have those dates, and I'll say this to Rick as well as Jim, once you have those dates, Denise, if you could get those dates out to members of the board as was suggested earlier in our meeting, that would be great. Any questions, comments for Matt? Okay, thank you, Matt. We'll move on to Rick and the UEN Advisory Council.
Thank you. On dates, I just submitted to Laura some potential dates for 2023. She'll take a look at those and line those things up with knowing, well, I think we've got pretty much things lined up for next year's meetings and that, and then we'll get the announcements out to the advisory council members and that. We've not held a meeting. Our last meeting was at the retreat, and that we opted that we just didn't have enough really pressing agenda items considering the all that's going on with holidays and that we just opted to not meet. But we do have a list of topics that we will be discussing and bringing, as the advisory councils, particularly, I added today the diversity, inclusion and equity portion of that. But also others, relating to digital safety, safe use of technology, digital citizenship, accessible resource, making sure our resources are accessible. Number of staff members and myself, a number of staff members from UEN and myself attended a 5-week workshop from CAST and ISKME on accessible OER resources and how we can make sure that our materials that we do have online are accessible to all students, and that. Obviously, there's a lot, with libraries and sensitive materials. We thought that would be a good discussion for the advisory council. And then, we'll be doing an inventory on technology for next year. So we'll give some input on that and professional learning of educators. So there's numerous topics that we'll be able to explore during the coming year. And we'll certainly take direction from the board on things that you would like to have information on. But I think where you're heading and the ideas you're having with keeping more involvement with board members, I think is great.
Great. Thank you, Rick. Any questions or comments for Rick and the UEN Advisory Council? Okay, it's been some time since we've heard from the Technology Advisory Council, so we're grateful for Jim, who I believe is traveling, but appreciate him joining in remotely. Jim.
Glad to be here, and thank you for this time. I'll be very brief. We did have a meeting earlier this month, and we meet the first Thursday of every month. And the last time we discussed, had a very robust discussion about esports, and came away from that with several action items, including making sure that IPv6 is enabled throughout the network, working with different schools to make sure that their local area networks and firewalls are compatible with what we're doing, and making sure that they're not blocking any of the traffic, and we're not held back from the traffic for esports. We have not concluded that discussion, but there's a lot going on there and a lot that we're unpacking from that, and we appreciate the good and robust discussion that came from that. Next meeting, they'll be taking up the 5G white paper that we've done as far as for the USHE strategic planning, so they're going to have comment and input into that. And we do have a conflict with Matt's telehealth advisory council, so we're going to be moving our time, and we'll get back with all of you and let you know when that is, and we'll make sure we get that published. That's all I have.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Any questions, comments for Jim and the Technology Advisory Council? Wonderful. Appreciate the work of our advisory councils. And once again, we're excited in 2023 to make that more of a topic of discussion and changes and additions that can be made to benefit more from the fantastic work that is being done. Jim, we certainly wish you safe travels too. Lastly, on the agenda, you will notice that there are some holiday video and recent video productions. If you're not feeling the season yet, I urge you to watch the UETN holiday video. It will get you there. It's great. And there are some other videos as well that I commend to the board. We have reached the end of our meeting. Is there anything else that needs to be brought up from members of the board? Our next meeting, as per an earlier action, will be February 10th, and we'll let you know as soon as possible the timing of that meeting on the 10th. But with that, I wish you all happy holidays. Hope that you are able to take some time off from your busy responsibilities. Looking forward to seeing you all in 2023. Thank you again for your fantastic service on this board, and we thank Spencer and the UETN team for the fantastic job that they are doing. Looking forward to all that 2023 is going to bring. And with that, I will entertain a motion to close our meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Thank you, Jared. All in favor, please raise your hand. And you all have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert and Spencer. Great meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.